Hi there. The West has started punishing South Africa because of its friendship with Russia. And according to the latest news that has been making rounds across Africa, is that South Africa has reportedly lost its bid to host a Formula One race in the near future, which I suspect was to take place in 2024, supposedly due to its political alignment with Russia and plans to return the Kyalami circuit. South Africa used to have that circuit years ago, right? And they had been promised that they are going to return it or to have this race take place in South Africa in 2024. But then now they have cancelled it because they're saying South Africa is a friend of Russia, or rather is aligned with Russia. And before some of you start asking why should South Africa even have the Formula One, the answer is that they used to have it. They used to have it about 30 years ago when South Africa was ruled by the white apartheid rulers. You remember what used to happen before 1994. And after they got their independence, or their second independence in 1994 through Nelson Mandela, it was cancelled because the organizers of the Formula One were not supportive of this black regime. But now South Africa has been trying to return it. They have tried it more than 4 times, and each time they have been given a different excuse. And now this time round, the excuse is Russia. And this still goes back to that time in 1994. Why? Because Russia was one of the few countries that ensured South Africa got their independence in 1994, because they used to have these white minority apartheid rulers who are extremely racist. A lot of you know that history. But then the black people were trying to fight them to gain their independence, their freedom. And Russia was supporting them with guns and training in Zimbabwe. So a lot of people, like even the current South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, were freedom fighters in the neighboring country of Zimbabwe. And they were there being trained by Russian and being given Russian weapons to go back to South Africa and put pressure on this white apartheid government that was at the time being supported by the United States and other countries from Europe, like Britain. And eventually, they got their independence. So today, these same people want the black people in South Africa to forget that history and forget that Russia was there when they needed it, to help them, and align themselves with the United States, who was supporting the white apartheid regime. That's what they want. And because the black people there, and this came out in an interview that came out last week, a BBC interview. I'm going to put it at the end of this video if you haven't watched it, or even share the link. And a lot of people actually in South Africa support their government to continue aligning itself with the Russians, including the opposition. For example, Julius Malema from the opposition was asked the question, and his answer was the same as the Secretary General of the ruling party, Fikile Mbalula, who said that South Africa has no issue with Putin. They are not going to arrest Putin, and they are going to continue aligning themselves with Russia because of that history. So now you understand what we are trying to see here. They are trying to punish South Africa because South Africa has refused to do what they want. And they also don't have something like a leverage or something to blackmail South Africa with, because South Africa, unlike other African countries, it doesn't fully rely on the market from the United States and Europe for its trade. Of course, unlike other African countries, like for example, Kenya or Tanzania or Ghana, you find that more than 60% of their export goes to Europe. Kenya exports horticultural products, cut flowers, tea and coffee, and a lot of that goes to Europe. Same thing with Uganda, their coffee. Same thing with Tanzania. So you find that these Western countries use that trade as a reason to intimidate and force African countries to do what they want to do. So we align ourselves with the West not out of choice, But because we get forced to do that, because we have no other way, otherwise, we are blackmailed. At the same time, countries are not vulnerable. They don't have an Achilles heel for these Western countries to, squeeze. Like South Africa, in this case, they now use simple things like Formula One, like saying that you're not going to host the F1, circuit. I mean, who gives a hoot about an event that South Africa has not hosted in that years? Does that mean that because they are not going to host it, they are going to stop breathing? Anyway, back to the story. The other issue that is playing out here is the BRICS, because South Africa is a member of this new body called the BRICS, where you find countries like Brazil from Latin America. We have countries like now South Africa in Africa. We have India. We have China. We have Saudi Arabia wanting to join. We have Iran and Russia. So this BRICS has created a lot of fear among the Western countries, and that's why they're going after the easiest target, which is in this case South Africa, because they think they can turn South Africa, and then after South Africa they might go after India, and after India, Brazil. So they start with the member they think is the weakest in the group, but South Africa has stood their ground, and that is what is happening. And that is a form of multipolarism, because now we have China and its friends forming the BRICS, and now the United States and their thieving Western countries and liars still part of the old order. And they are forcing countries to follow them, not out of choice, as I said, but because they have something they can use to intimidate you. They can use the trade. And that's why the Kenyan president recently said African countries have to find a way to trade among themselves without using the dollar or the euro. And it's a sad state that Kenya pays Tanzania not using Kenyan shillings or Tanzanian shillings, but they have to go somewhere and look for dollars and then come back and cross the border to pay Tanzania in dollars. That's how trade in Africa works. And you find intra-African trade, that is trade between individual African countries, is still less than 5%. You pick any African country and you look at their exports, you'll find that a lot of the export goes to Europe and other countries outside the continent. Even though the things they're selling, some of them are actually needed back in Africa. I mean, you don't want to tell me that every African country produces the same goods as the other. They don't. Nigeria, for example, they have a shortage of milk, and you find a country like Uganda with an excess of a supply of milk. So why should Uganda sell their milk in Algeria, as they are doing today, and not Nigeria? Because it's just easy to do that. And Nigeria goes to New Zealand to import powdered milk from New Zealand. So those are some of the things that are creating all this tension, where the BRICS countries are trying to say that we can trade using our own individual currencies, and we should have trade between one another with the neighbors. And the West doesn't want that, because their position of dominance is being threatened.